So in this video, I'd like to talk to you about UVs inside of Zbrush. Now, UV coordinates are a way of taking a 2D texture and then wrapping it around a 3D object. If you think about a football or a soccer ball and think about how if you were to cut apart that pattern that makes up a soccer ball, you could flatten it out so it's a sphere that can be flattened. The same is true of UVs. UVs look at your three-dimensional object. They look at each individual polygon and they look for ways to cut along these edges so the object can be laid out flat, sort of like putting together a pattern for a garment. It's a three-dimensional object that's been cut so it can lay out flat. And if you can lay it out flat, you can paint a two-dimensional texture that then wraps around the object. Now, to generate UVs inside of ZBrush, we need to step down to our lowest subdivision level and go to Tool, UV Map. Now, if I morph UV on this character, there's actually a UV set that's already on this model that was created outside of ZBrush in Maya. But I want to talk to you about how to create UVs directly inside of ZBrush. So if you look here, we can set our map resolution to begin with. I'll set it to 4K. You can adjust your map border, and that's the overpaint border so you don't get seams. Usually leaving it at 4 is fine. Now here we're able to create UVs. The first few, UV cylindrical, UV spherical, UV planar, UV box, and UV box tiles, these are all for primitives. And if you're dealing with that type of object, it'll be very apparent that you want to use those UVs. The ones that we're most concerned with are AUV, GUV, and PUV tiles. These are the quickest automated one-button press way of creating UVs in ZBrush. If I press AUV tiles and then morph UV, what ZBrush has done here is it's taken each individual face and assigned it some texture space, and it's taking up the full 4K image space, so it's extremely efficient. However, it's not human readable, and that's not really desirable because if you've got an error in your map that you need to paint out in Photoshop, you'll never be able to find it. These aren't really suitable for most pipeline applications because we need to be able to open up a texture map and read it as a human eye. GUV tiles is another one. This is grouped UV tiles where things are grouped by their level of detail. Again, not human readable. Now I have used these when I wanted to get UVs out in a hurry for a personal project or a quick render. But as a general rule, I wouldn't use them because UV Master is so efficient, so fast, and it produces human readable UVs. So let's take a look at that now. I'm going to go back up to the Z plugin menu, tear that off on the side of the screen, and you'll find UV Master right here. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to click Work on Clone. That's going to copy the model, and it's going to delete the subdivision level. So I'm working on a single subdivision level of this mesh. Here's my original model there. It's still there, but this is the copy, the clone that's been created by UV Master. Now I'm going to unwrap the mesh. So I'm going to click Unwrap, and this is going to give me just the base unwrapping. I have check seams turned on so I can see where the seams are. If I click Flatten, it will flatten out the pelt, and I can see this is not a really good UV. It's not clear what's what, and the seams are running through the worst possible area, the center of the face. So how do we stop it from doing that? All right, what we're going to do is we're going to enable control painting. I'm going to turn off polygroups for the moment, and I'm going to turn on protect. Now here I've got a control painting that's already on the model. The red area is being protected from getting seams. The blue area is saying, ZBrush, try and put your seams here. So let's take a look at how we do this. I'll go to RGB. I'm going to select Color, Fill Object. Color, Fill Object, and it'll clear that control painting. Now I'll go back to red. So if I've got Protect selected, I'm going to be painting red. I'm going to paint red all over the face. Let's go back to our dot stroke with no alpha. So we get a nice clean painting here. I'm just going to paint red all through the face and ears. Now I'm going to click Attract, and Attract is going to paint blue. And blue is going to attract the seam. So I'm going to attract seams to here. Let's go back to Protect, and let's go ahead and try and protect these sides of the head as well. So basically I'm saying, hey ZBrush, do me a favor and give me a seam that runs down the back of the head. So I'm going to click Unwrap again, and there you go. We get a seam that runs right down the back of the head. If we were to flatten this now, you see we get a much nicer pelt. It's very clear what's what. It's very easy to read. So if I want to get these UVs onto my model, I simply click Copy UVs, come back over to my original mesh and paste UVs. And now if I go to the UV map menu, I can click Morph UV, and it will show me that it has applied those UV coordinates. Now there's a couple other things in the control painting I want to talk to you about. If I enable control painting again, we can turn on density. And if I take density and I do ×2, areas that I paint with this sort of lime green are going to get twice as much texture density. If I do ½ and then paint the back of the head, areas that are painted with this blue are going to get half the texture density. Now if I unwrap again and then flatten, you'll see the effect that this has. It gives us more texture density for the face and less texture density for the rest of the head. Now generally this is not something that I use. I like my UVs to be quite uniform and just increase my map resolution. But I think it is important to know that this is available. You can also attract from ambient occlusion, so this will automatically paint your model with attract seams based on where the shadows are. So that's actually quite useful. Ambient occlusion, of course, is going to be darkest where areas are occluded. So it's a nice place to hide your seams. So if you have a successful control map and that you want to save it, you can always save your control map here. Just click that button and it'll ask you to save your control maps. Now also, you can unwrap all, and if you unwrap all, it will unwrap all your subtools, but I actually prefer to do them one at a time. So now let's take a look at a different model. We've opened up our alien, which has poly painting on here. And if I go into frame mode, you see that I've actually got polygroups set up, a different polygroup for each antenna and a different polygroup for each ear, and then a polygroup for the head and torso. This is going to allow us to use the polygroups option here under UV Master. So what I'll do is I will go back and click Work on Clone. That will once again clone the mesh, and I'm going to enable control painting, go to Protect, make sure that my brush is set to RGB, and let's go ahead and paint red into the face. And I'm not too worried about getting it on the ears because we've already told Zbrush that anywhere that I have a polygroup, it's going to create a separate UV island, so it's already going to cut a seam around the ear. That's just kind of a given at this point. Now I'm going to switch to Attract, and I'm going to paint an Attract stripe down the back of the head. Go back to Protect, and let's just try and protect these shoulders. Now I am going to go to Attract, turn my brush size down real low, and I'm going to run a stripe up the back of the antenna. I want Zbrush to try its best to put its seams up the back of the antenna. Now that's our control painting. I'm going to click Unwrap, and here we go. Right out of the gate, perfect seam down the back of the head, seams up the back of the antenna, and a seam running around the ear with the seam going up the back of the ear tips. So I could not ask for better placement. So now I'm going to click Copy UVs. Go back to our head and make sure that we step down to our lowest subdivision level, and I will paste UVs. Now if we go down here to UV map, we can morph UV and then see what we get. Oops, I accidentally double clicked it. There we go. And we'll turn on solo so we don't have the subtools. There we have the islands for our ears, the islands for the antenna, and the head. So this is a really nice UV to work from. Incidentally, it is possible now to paint in this view. There's a whole separate video where I talk about adjusting poly paint as well as painting in Morph UV mode, so I'd recommend checking that out. So here we've got our UVs established. What this means now, I'm going to Morph UV back. We're able to extract maps. That means that I can take all of my poly paint here and I can bake that down into a texture map which can live outside of Zbrush. I can take that to Maya or 3D Studio Max. This model can now be animated and rendered in a pipeline. It also means that I'm able to share this with people that are working outside of ZBrush. For example, if I have a Z tool that has poly painting, um, you're only going to be able to see that poly painting either inside of ZBrush or in um, Keyshot. Keyshot does render ZBrush poly paint. However, if I wanted to take my model and put it up as an OBJ with a texture map, anyone with any 3D application can then take that model, open it, and then render it with my texture maps and my displacement maps. So being able to create UVs and then extract maps is very, very important for portability, for getting your work outside of ZBrush. Now, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I think UV Master is an incredible tool. It is an automated UV mapping solution, but as you saw, it is just miles above all the other automated solutions that predate it inside of ZBrush, those being the AUV tiles and let's go to create the AUV tiles and GUV tiles, which are not human readable. This gives you a human readable UV result. It takes an enormous amount of user input, but it still automates the process of unwrapping UVs. And you can really get in there and have a whole lot of control if you take advantage of the fact that anytime you have polygroups and you turn on the polygroup button here, ZBrush will create separate UV islands from those regions. You may also want to note that if you have control painting turned on, oops, I have to go back to my clone. If you have control painting turned on, you can also attract your seams via ambient occlusion. I find this works nicely for more abstract shapes or hard surface shapes. What this does is it places your seams in areas that are occluded by shadow. So anywhere the ambient occlusion is darkest is obviously going to be a more recessed and hidden area. And this is actually kind of a nice way to take a more complicated object and attract your UV seams into those regions. So be aware that that option is also available. So that completes our look at UV Master and UVs inside of ZBrush. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.